tonight we're in Romans 10. As we're getting ready to get there tonight, I just felt like during worship the Lord showed me that He'd give us this territory when the Lord handpicked us for this particular season, for this particular area, for this particular time, for this particular house. When He handpicked us, all of us, He gave us this territory. And I just really during worship I seen the weeds that were here, the soil that was hard and dry, and the weeds that were here, and I seen the vultures and the enemy was just like hanging around. And I really feel like He showed me that we rolled our sleeves up the moment that we all joined together. We answered the call. We rolled our sleeves up. We started to plow and plow and plow and plow and pull up the weeds and plow and turn over that foul soil and plow and clean it up. We put watchmen. I just seen it in our vision that we put watchmen around there. We chased away the vultures. We chased away the ravens. We chased away all the things that wanted to come in and to ruin and to take the territory. We put watchmen on the wall, and that night and day, we told during the day, and we had watchmen on the wall at night to not let the enemy come back, to not let him take back the territory that we had conquered. And we got that ground plowed up and watered it, and then we planted the seed, and now I see the seed, it sprouted up and it's coming up, and we continue to watch so that the enemy can't come and to take that seed, and we worked night and day. We worked as a group night and day, and now that harvest, I see that field is so white for the harvest. It's so full, and it's amber waves. I just seen it in my vision. It's this amber waves. And I felt like the Lord said, I would rather plant 10 seeds of pure crop than 1,000,000 seeds of the tares. And so it doesn't matter how many of us are here. It doesn't matter. What matters is how pure the soil is and how pure the seed is that goes into that soil. And I think the important part of it is that so we have these watchmen on the wall so that the enemy can't come and plant those tares in the middle of the night, because that's what the parable says, that the enemy come and he planted those tares or those weeds in the middle of the night. And I just feel like the Lord is just during that song whisper, I just feel like He really showed that to me, that He's well pleased with where we're at. He's well pleased with what we've accomplished. And I'm just overwhelmed with that. Romans chapter 10. We left off on chapter 9. And the last thing we left off with was that Israel missed it. So the 10 northern tribes, they were stumbling over the Torah. They were stumbling that they didn't have the Torah, that God had divorced them, and that they no longer had the Torah. And that the southern tribe who had the Torah, who were obedient, it's actually because of the southern tribe that we are here. But the southern tribe misunderstood the righteousness. They misunderstood the legalistic observance of it. One thing about the southern tribe is that they're very, even though they're legalistic and even though they had things really messed up by the time that Yeshua showed up, but they were very serious about their Torah. They were very serious. They were very serious about it. Even though they had it twisted and corrupted, they were very serious about it. And it's because of the southern tribe, guys, that we even are here. It's because of the southern tribe that we have the Torah that's preserved. Because the northern tribe didn't preserve the Torah. And so if it wouldn't have been for the southern tribe, we wouldn't have this precious book with us today. There would have been no place for Yeshua to come to redeem us. It's easy for us to be judgmental towards the Jewish people, towards the southern tribe, the Jewish nation, that they missed it, and how they don't believe in Yeshua, how they missed it. But I think it's important that we see it from a different of a place of being so appreciative and so honored that they preserve the Torah for us. Now, Yeshua had to come and straighten it out. Remember, he says, I come not to abolish the law, I come not to abolish the Torah, but I come to set it straight. So he had to come and fix some things that they had mixed in it, but they kept the purity of it. And I think we need to really be thankful, so thankful for that southern tribe. So the southern tribe, they missed it because they didn't understand the righteousness of it. And that's where we left off in chapter 9 as we come into chapter 10. Brothers, verse 1, my heart's deepest desire and my prayer to God for Israel is for their salvation. See, Paul's still talking about Israel here. He's still talking about the northern tribe and the southern tribe, both of them. He's talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. We're not even included in this. Chapter 10, you guys, chapter 10 from a Gentile perspective is the most twisted chapter probably in the whole New Testament. And yet it's not even, chapter 10 this isn't even talking about us as pagan Gentiles or previous pagan Gentiles. He's still talking about the 12 tribes. Verse 2, for I can testify to their zeal for God. Now here he's identifying the southern tribe. I can testify to the zeal for God, but it's not based on a correct understanding. I think I said that. We're going to go back to verse 1. When he talks about for the God for Israel, he's actually talking about the southern tribe, but it's not talking about all 12 tribes. He's actually addressing right now the 2 southern tribes. For I can testify to their zeal for God, but it's not based on a correct understanding. So the 10 northern tribes were divorced. They didn't have a zeal for God at this point. For since they are unaware of God's way of making people righteous and instead seek to set up their own, they have not submitted themselves to God's way of making people righteous. So they have twisted it. They thought that observing the Torah, they thought that keeping the legalistic laws of the Torah was what made them righteous. They thought the Torah made them righteous. And as we've very clearly identified through this book, through this letter of Romans, that the Torah cannot make us righteous. The Torah can identify sin, and it can identify the curses and the blessings. It very clearly shows that, but it cannot make, just observing the Torah cannot make us righteous. And that's what they thought. It says that they thought their way of making it right was by, first of all, taking God's Torah and twisting it into this great big thing that God never intended it to be, and then trying to observe that. And they thought that's what made them righteous. Verse 4. Verse 4 is absolutely amazing. For the goal in the Jewish Bible that I use, for the goal at which the Torah aims is the Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. For the goal at which the Torah aims is the Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. Now that seems pretty self-explanatory, but let me read to you some other translations. King James, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth. ESV, for Christ, same exact thing. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. Is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. And that verse has been so twisted to that verse, if you could go to any sensational Christianity denomination that you want to, and they will use that verse to show that Christ is the end of the law. Christ is our righteousness, and Christ is the end of the law. The law no longer has any part of righteousness. And that's what they say. Now, what's really amazing is the non-inspired version, the NIV. But it could actually, but it actually speaks in a little different way. I got that from Chris, by the way. Christ, but it actually it does make it sound better in that particular version. Christ is the accumulation of the law. See, that even sounds a little bit better. Christ is the accumulation of the law so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. That sounds a little better even in that version. That which surprises me. But now listen to this. Now listen to the New Living Translation. Tabitha. Listen to the New Living Translation. For Christ has already accomplished the purpose for which the law was given. As a result, all who believe are made right through God. That specifically says the law is in the toilet. Isn't Now I'm gonna tell you what it says if we read it word for word in the Greek. This is gonna blow your mind. It says, I'm gonna read it the way it reads, and I'll read it the way that he would to put the words in order. It says, consummation for the law of the anointed, that is Christ, into justice or righteousness to everyone that is believing. So now here's what that, if you put those words in order, here's what it says. The Messiah is the consummation or the blood covenant of the Torah. That's word for word. The Messiah is the consummation of the Torah. The Messiah is the blood covenant of the Torah. That's actually word for word out of the Greek. The Messiah is the consummation of the Torah for righteousness. The blood covenant. Well, that's amazing. That goes a long way from saying that he threw the Torah out, that he fulfilled the Torah, and it's no longer needed. That's absolutely amazing. You need to look up the Greek. It's amazing. I was blown away when I seen that. It actually uses that word. The Greek word telsos means consummation, and the Messiah is the consummation of the Torah for righteousness. Verse 5, for Moses writes about the righteousness grounded in Torah. For Moses, and this is what blows me away, you guys. So Paul is teaching, and all he's teaching is Old Testament. That's all in all his writings, all he's teaching is the Old Testament. He's explaining it before he gives these verses out of the Old Testament, but he's just teaching the Torah. That's all he's doing, he's teaching the Torah. For Moses writes, it says right there, for Moses writes about the righteousness grounded in the Torah, that the person who does these things will attain life through them. And that comes from Leviticus 18. Now I'll read that to you. Leviticus 18. I'm going to start, it's actually Leviticus 18:5 is that one verse. It's Leviticus 18:5, but I'm going to start a few verses ahead. Leviticus 18:1. Yahovah said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel, tell them, I am Yahovah your God. You are not to engage in the activities found in the land of Egypt, where you used to live. You're not to engage in the activities of the land you used to live. You are not to engage in the activities found in the land of Canaan, where I'm bringing you. Nor are you to live by their laws. You are to obey my rulings and my laws and live accordingly. I am Yahovah your God. And then here's that verse that Paul's quoting. You are to observe my laws and my rulings. If a person does them, he will have life through them. I am Yahovah. That's what Paul quoted there. Now, how can we take verse 4, since we make verses out of this, and then we can say that does away with the law, when Paul, right behind it, quotes what we just read. You are to observe my laws and rulings. If the person does them, he will have life through them. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing how we picked out these one verses and made a doctrine out of them that goes completely against what the Scripture says. Verse 6. Moreover, the righteousness grounded in trusting says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven, that is to bring Messiah down, or who will ascend into Sheol, that is to bring the Messiah up from the dead. What then does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That comes from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 through 14. So I'm going to read that now. I'm going to start up a little bit sooner. I actually have from the beginning, but we're going to run long to that if I fill all these in. So we'll just go up to verse 10. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 10. However, all this will happen. Now so let me explain here a little bit instead of reading this whole thing. He just got done in verses Deuteronomy 28, 29. He talked about the blessings and the curses. Remember, the Torah. It identifies sin, and then it tells of the blessings that you receive, and it tells of the curses you receive, depending if you follow the Torah or not. So 30, he summed it up at the beginning of 30, and in verse 10, he says, however, all this will happen. All what will happen? All the blessings and the curses, because that's what he just got to talk about, was Deuteronomy 28, 29 talk about the blessings and the curses that we will receive by either following the Torah or not following the Torah. However, all of this will happen only if you pay attention to what Adonai or Yahovah your God says. so that you obey his laws or his mitzvahs and regulations which are written in the book of the Torah. If you turn to Yahovah your God with all your heart and all your being. So here's where that's quoted from that we just read. For this mitzvah, or this law, this which I am giving you today, is not too hard for you. This law, which I'm giving you today, Moses said, is not too hard. Why do we say the law is impossible? Why have we been taught the law is impossible to keep? He says, right, for this mitzvah, which I'm giving you today, is not too hard for you. It is not beyond your reach. It isn't in the sky so that no one needs to ask, so that you need to ask who will go to the sky and bring it down for us and make us hear it, so that we can obey it. Likewise, it isn't beyond the sea so that you need to ask who will cross the sea for us, bring it to us, and make us hear it so we can obey it. On the contrary, the word is very close to you. It's in your mouth, it's even in your heart, therefore you can do it. Paul just quoted that. He's talking about the Torah. It's so amazing. He's saying it's not too hard for you. It's right here. You don't need to say, who's going to go get it and bring it to us so we obey it. In the sky, in the water. He said, and that's what he's addressing this as to Christ, but Christ is the Torah. That is the word about trust which we proclaim, namely, verse 9. So now, keep in mind how we just addressed it, how Paul just told us, because we're coming into something that's really important. So we just heard here that Paul is really saying that Christ is the consummation of the blood covenant of the Torah. That he is the consummation. That's how we become righteous, is the way that we can observe the Torah is our righteousness is through the Messiah. That's the only way we can observe the Torah is through Christ. And it's not too difficult for us. That's what he just got done saying. And he comes into verse 9. That if you acknowledge publicly with your mouth that Yeshua is Lord and trust in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be delivered. So that verse is the verse that every Christian says, if I say Jesus Christ is Lord, right, now I'm saved, and I'm saved forever and ever and ever. That's all I have to do. But we didn't see the whole beginning of it, what he was leading into. Has nothing to do with that. For with verse 10, for with the heart one goes on trusting, and thus continues towards righteousness. With the heart one goes on trusting, and thus continues towards righteousness. How do you go on trusting? You go on trusting that the Messiah is the Torah, and so as you walk out the Torah, as you live out the Torah every day, which is Christ, that his righteousness it continues to grow. It continues towards righteousness. While with the mouth one keeps making public acknowledgement. And thus continues towards deliverance. And thus continues towards deliverance, or continues towards salvation. We're on a walk. It says we have a hope of salvation. My friends, we have a hope of salvation. We have a hope. We will continue to walk out this. We'll continue to be made righteous, and we'll continue to be walking towards deliverance or towards salvation. Verse 11, for the passage quoted says that everyone who rests his trust on him will not be humiliated. Isaiah 28:16. Therefore, that's what he just quoted. He just quoted Isaiah 28:16. Therefore, here is what Yahovah Elohim says. Look, I am laying in Zion a tested stone, a costly cornerstone, a firm foundation stone. He who trusts will not rush here and there. I am laying in Zion a tested stone, a costly cornerstone, a firm foundation stone. He who trusts will not rush here and there. That's what he just quoted. That means, verse 12, that there is no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. That means if we put our trust in that cornerstone, there's no difference between the Jew. We're all made righteous through Messiah, through the Torah, through accepting the Messiah as the Messiah. Yahovah is the same for everyone, rich towards everyone who calls on his name. Verse 13, so since everyone who calls on the name of Yahovah will be delivered. Do you see that? Everyone who calls on the name of Yahovah will be delivered. Not Yeshua, Yahovah. They're the same. They're together. Do you see that? That all who call on the name of Yahovah will be delivered. That's what it says there. Why does it say that there? Because it's a quote from the Old Testament. This comes from Joel. Now, here's something that's amazing. This passage in Joel is not talking about your salvation. It's talking about after. We're going to read this. This is actually after Joel chapter 3. And I'm going to read you this whole chapter, and then I'll tell you when we get to that verse that it quoted here. Joel chapter 3 and verse 1. Actually, in your English Bibles, it'll actually be Joel chapter 2, verse 28. But in the Hebrew, in the Jewish Bible, it's Joel chapter 3, verse 1. After this, I will pour out my spirit on all humanity. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions, and also on male and female slaves. In those days I will pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the sky and on earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and terrible day of Yahovah. Now here's that verse. At that time, whoever calls on the name of Yahovah will be saved. Do you see what's going on here? This passage is at the end of the Gentile age. We've been taught this is for our salvation today. This passage is talking about the Jewish people. So here's what's going to happen. And we're going to read that a little bit. Here's what's going to happen. We are in the Gentile age. Okay, we are in the age of we're in the Gentile age right now. So God gives the Torah to the people. I mean, quick overview. We've heard it so many times that you're probably sick of hearing it, right? The 10 northern tribes were not obedient to it. God divorced them. The 2 southern tribes continued with it. Although they did give it up, they did follow their sister, their twin sister, and they did get exiled, but they was able to come back. God had grace on them. They was able to come back, and they kept the Torah. But they have it so twisted and so legalistic that their hearts have been hardened. That's what it says in Isaiah 28, that their hearts, 29, but their hearts have been hardened. So God says, now I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna fulfill that. I'm gonna bring back my lost sheep of Israel. I'm going to bring back the lost sheep of Israel. I'm going to bring back, that's what Jesus said, I come for the lost sheep of Israel. But there's only one way. We talked about this before. The only way you can do that is he had to die. That because he divorced them, the only way that he could bring them, that they could come back into the marriage is if he died. So he died. So Jesus or Yeshua had to die. Now they could remarry the resurrected Jesus or Yeshua. And that's what he did. So now if we're not part of those 10 northern tribes, and I still think that a lot of us are going to be probably more than we realize are probably part of that 10 northern tribe. I really do believe that. But even if we're not, we're so attached with them because they have been intermingled with us so much that we don't even know who is who. So it doesn't matter. We've had the grace. That's the pure grace of God. That even if we did come from pagan Gentiles, we came with them because we were so intertwined with them that we was able to come back into this marriage with them. And it says that God is going to do this. He said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that during the Gentile age. I'm going to do that to provoke the Jewish people, those who were that kept that Torah, to provoke them to jealousy. So Joel chapter 3 is talking about, now at the end of that Gentile age, now he's calling back his Jewish people, his southern tribes. Okay? And so, because we haven't seen the moon, into blood. We haven't seen the fire turn into darkness, the sun turn into darkness. He said, I will show wonders in the sky and on earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. That's coming yet. So what he's talking about here, he's talking about waking up those southern tribes. And that's why he quoted that. At that time, whoever calls on the name of Yahovah will be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, as Yahovah has promised. Among the survivors will be those whom Adonai or Yahovah called. Now we know that where do we see this? We see this in Matthew 24, right? He said, 2 will be working in the field, 1 will be taken, 1 will be left. In those days, don't turn back and get your coat. It'll be so bad. He's saying that there's going to be a war, a nuclear war in Israel, especially over Jerusalem and Israel. And he's saying, you better run. That's what Matthew 24 is all about. That's what Joel is prophesying here. He's prophesying at the end of the Gentile age. I think it's so important that we realize that this chapter, we think it has to do with us as Gentiles today, and it doesn't. Verse 14, but how can they call on someone if they haven't trusted him? And how can they trust in someone if they haven't heard about him? How can they hear about someone if no one's proclaiming him? And how can people proclaim him unless God sends them? We have taken this verse, just like every other verse, and we have made this so Nicolaitanian. It's so, you're called to be a preacher, so we're gonna send you out. You're called to be an evangelist. We're gonna send you out. This has nothing to do with that. This is saying it's our job as Gentiles to show God's people, the southern tribe, the truth. How can it? Remember, we just got done saying he just talked about the southern tribe. He's going to lead the southern tribe back. How can they know if he don't send someone? If we don't go and do our job? Our job as Gentiles, our job is to show the Jewish people that God has a way back, that God has a way of righteousness. That's what this is all about. It's our job. And so now we've twisted this Jesus into something that they know is false, so now we've actually turned them the other direction. Jewish people actually turn the other direction because they know that whatever you believe is hogwash. Because they have the Old Testament. They have the Torah. They know the Torah. And they know that what you do is completely opposite of the Torah. And they know that the Yahovah that they serve and that the Yeshua that they've read about that's going to come one day is not what you guys see as Jesus. We see as Jesus. So we're actually absolutely 180 degrees off what this says. But how can, I'm going to start over 14. How can they call on someone? He's talking about they. Who's they? The southern tribe. How can they call on someone if they haven't trusted him? How can they trust in someone if they haven't heard about him? Who's him? Yeshua. And how can they hear about someone if no one's proclaiming him? We're not proclaiming Yeshua, we're proclaiming a Gentile Jesus. And how can people proclaim him unless God sends them? As the Tanakh says, how beautiful are the feet of those announcing good news about good things. That comes from Isaiah 52:7. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, proclaiming peace, bringing good news of good things, announcing salvation, and saying to Zion, your God is king. And saying to Zion, your God is king. Who is Zion? Israel. Your God. Who is their God? Yahovah. Do you see that, what he's prophesying? It's our job to go to Israel and say, your God is king. He's our king too. That's what he's talking about here. Completely not what we thought this meant. Verse 16. The problem is that they haven't paid attention. Paul knew something about us in the year of 2018. The problem is that they haven't all paid attention to the good news and obeyed it. There's the whole problem. Paul said it. The problem is they haven't paid attention to the good news and obeyed it. For Isaiah says, Adonai, Yahovah, who has trusted what he has heard from us. Isaiah 52:13. See how I've started, this is actually Isaiah 50, what he quotes here is Isaiah 53:1, but I'm going to go back a little bit. Isaiah 52:13. See how my servant will succeed. He will be raised up, exalted, highly honored. just as many were appalled at him because he was so disfigured that he didn't even seem human and simply no longer looked like a man. So now he will startle many nations. That's pretty gross, isn't it? Talk about Yeshua as he hung on the cross. He didn't even represent a man. He was so mangled he didn't even look like a human being. That's what it's saying there. Because of him, kings will be speechless, for they will see what they had not been told. They will ponder things they had never heard. Who believes our report? To whom is the arm of Yahovah revealed? That's what he's quoting there. So what he's saying there is when Yeshua came as a suffering servant, again, now that we have what the context of this whole thing is about, he's talking about the southern tribe. So when Yeshua came as a suffering servant, and he hung on the cross so mangled that you couldn't even recognize he was a human being, the Jewish people didn't believe that he was Messiah. But because of that, we was able to come into the family. Now we're proclaiming that this Yeshua, who they murdered, we murdered, but we're proclaiming to them, your God, your Messiah, who you murdered, who you seen hanging on a cross and couldn't even recognize as a human being, he is the King of righteousness. He was the suffering servant, and that was him. Now he's the King of righteousness. Again, it's still talking about our job is to proclaim this to our Jewish brothers, the southern tribe. Verse 17, so trust comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through a word proclaimed about the Messiah. But, I say, isn't it rather that they didn't hear? No, they did hear. Their voice has gone out through the whole world, and their words to the end of the earth. Psalm 19:2. Actually, in the English Bible, it's 19:1, and in the Jewish Bible, this is Psalm 19:2. The heavens declare the glory of God. The dome of the sky speaks the works of his hands. Every day it utters speech. Every night it reveals knowledge. Without speech, without a word, without their voice being heard, their line goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. One thing that if you read the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, the Tanakh, one thing you're going to see is that God spoke, he very clearly showed how to read the signs. He very clearly shows that God's goodness, and we've seen that in Romans chapter 1, that no one has an excuse because of God's creation. He shows the signs in the heaven that he's real. He shows us who he is through the signs. And that's what Psalm 19 is saying. And so it's saying, going back to this, so trust comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through the word proclaimed. But I say, isn't it rather that they didn't hear it? No, they heard it. What he's saying there is, they had the Tanakh. This southern tribe had the Tanakh. They don't have an excuse. They don't have an excuse, because it was all written down for them. Verse 19, but I say, isn't it rather that Israel didn't understand? And then it comes, I will provoke you to jealousy over a non-nation, over a nation void of understanding. I will make you angry. Deuteronomy, that's Deuteronomy 31. Actually, it's down to verse 21. Where do I want to start? I made that whole chapter. There's so much. When I was studying, it's just like, geez, now where do I start on this? Because I just don't want to jump in on that. Because Paul knows this. What's amazing, you got to wrap your mind on this. Paul knows this Tanakh, word by word, by memory. So when he's speaking this stuff, when he's writing his letters, he knows exactly. But it isn't that. So he quotes us this one, what we call a verse, but he knows what the whole context of that is. Right? So I try to wrap my mind to that place and say, okay, Paul wasn't just giving us that one little verse when he quoted this. He was giving us the meaning. Because they all knew the meaning too. The people that he wrote to in those days, they also knew what if Paul quoted out of what we call Deuteronomy 21. They knew he was quoting this whole. So I'm like, where do I jump in at? And I kind of get carried away, and I write down the whole chapter, and it gets to be a little bit long, so we're running close anyway. So it's actually 31:21. So I'll just go back to 31:19 and see how it fits in. Yahovah saw and was filled with scorn at his sons and daughters' provocation, he said, I will hide my face from them and see what will become of them, for they are a perverse generation, untrustworthy children. They aroused my jealousy with a non-God and provoked me with their vanities. I will arouse their jealousy with a non-people and provoke them with a vile nation. Do you see that now? He's saying, they forsake me, and they made me jealous. Now I'm going to make them jealous. Now I'm going to use a non-nation, and I'm going to make them jealous. Which is pretty amazing. Because there's kind of a dual meaning here. A non-nation really isn't necessarily the 10 northern tribes. A non-nation would be the pagan nations. So if God can reach out to the pagan generations, the Canaanites and the Hittites, right? If God can reach out to the Amorites nations, and if his grace can go that far, then that even provokes those who God divorced into jealousy. So that's what led them to come back. Then they provoked their sister, southern tribes, into jealousy. So it's like a domino effect. So a non-nation provokes the nation that God divorced. And then God brought them back, and then they provoke, because I can tell you that the southern tribes hate the northern tribes. I mean, the southern tribes absolutely, they think that they're worse than the pagan nations because they had God and they forsake him. Verse 20, moreover, Isaiah boldly says, I was found by those who were not looking for me. I became known to those who did not ask for me. Isaiah 65:1. I made myself accessible to those who didn't ask for me. I let myself be found by those who didn't seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation not called by my name. See, that's not 10 northern tribes.
It's not us.
Yeah. It's not the 10 northern tribes because the 10 northern tribes were called by his name. See what I'm saying? That's why I said this is a domino effect. That God saved the pagan nations, the Amorites, and the Hittites, and the Canaanites, and all the other ites. All the other ites. God saved them, and that provoked the 10 northern tribes to jealousy. Then God saved them, and that provoked, now that is in the process of provoking the southern tribes to jealousy. And that's what this is saying. I made myself accessible to those who didn't ask for me. I let myself be found by those who didn't seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation not called by my name. I spread out my hands all day long to a rebellious people. I'm going to have to finish up here because I'm going to put 20 and 21 together because this Isaiah 65 and 62, it's quoting out of both 65:1 and 65:2. So I'll go back. Moreover, Romans 10:20. Moreover, Isaiah boldly said, I was found by those who were not looking for me. I became known to those who did not ask for me. But to Israel, he says, all day long I held out my hands to a people who kept disobeying and contradicting. Now we'll read that Isaiah 65:1 and 65:2. I made myself accessible to those who didn't ask for me. I let myself be found by those who didn't seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation not called by my name. I spread out my hand all day long to a rebellious people who live in a way that is not good, who follow their own inclinations. There he's talking about the 10 northern tribes. So first he's talking about the non-Jews, or the non-chosen. And in verse 2, he spread out his hand back to those he divorced. And all of this, we're going to, we're jumping chapters because our Bible puts chapters in there, but this is just a letter written, and we'll find out next week. He's jumping now, he's going to come back and say, because he reached out to the non-nation, and then he reached out to the nation that he divorced, now he's calling back his people, and that's where we're coming into chapter 11. Now he's going to use all that to bring his people, his chosen southern tribe, back in. A little bit different than what we've seen before, I think. Hmm.